Good morning if you're on the West Coast, and good afternoon if you're on the East Coast like I am. Welcome to Turning Negativity into Positive Results with Marsha Reynolds. Marsha, I'm so thrilled to welcome you today.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
We're starting a brand new month, and this is a great opportunity for us to all learn together. Before we get started, I want to let you know about a few housekeeping items. As we move forward in the presentation, we want to invite you today to participate with us via social media by tweeting the things that you're learning and listening to in this event. And so Marsha has at the bottom of her slides her Twitter handle and also a hashtag for today's event. So we definitely want to invite you to participate with us throughout the event. We are also going to stop several times today for some questions and answers as Marsha shares with us. And so we want to invite you to use the question panel to indicate your questions. And what we'd like to request, because we do have a high volume of callers on today's event, is that you would put the word question before the question so that we can be sure that we see that, and we will get to as many of those as possible. The other thing I want to also let you know is that we're going to do a very special giveaway at the end of this event, and we're going to give you a chance to send some feedback, and 5 people will win Kindle copies of Marsha's amazing book that I have with me today. And so we hope that you'll stay with us throughout the duration of the event and that you'll choose to participate in that ebook giveaway at the end of the event. Okay, so what I want to invite you to do right now is to go ahead and say hello in the question panel so that you can try that out and be ready to share your questions later. And here's what I'm going to ask. I'm going to ask what drew you to today's event. We'd love to hear from you as we're beginning. I'd like to take just a minute to introduce you to Marsha Reynolds. And I learned a few things about Marsha this morning in our conversation before the event. I learned, Marsha, that you not only have your PhD, you also have 2 master's degrees on some pretty disparate topics. And we had this conversation about accidental careers. Marsha, can you tell the group a little bit about what you meant when you mentioned accidental careers?
Yeah. Well, we were talking about my lighting for the video, and I said that my first master's degree was in broadcasting, so it gave me a few useful things I still use. But it helped me land my first job, which was as the audiovisual coordinator, where I pushed TVs around in film projectors, but it was in a mental hospital for a training department. And my boss decided to go get her doctorate, and she dumped the entire department in my lap, with my first assignment being the management training. And so that's why I quickly went to get a second master's degree in instructional design and training, so I kind of could figure out what I was doing. But at least it got me my first job. So it was useful for that.
I love that. Well, for those who don't know Marsha's background, Marsha travels the world coaching leaders and teaching classes in advanced coaching skills, leadership, and emotional intelligence. She specializes in using coaching to create breakthroughs in thinking, and we're all going to have the chance to experience that firsthand today through the content that she's sharing. Marsha is also a pioneer in the coaching profession, and she was the 5th global president of the International Coach Federation. Excerpts from her interviews and her 3 leadership books have appeared in many places, including Harvard Management Review, Fast Company, Fortune.com, CNN.com, and Psychology Today. So we are definitely in for a treat, and I know that we're all going to learn so much together today. And thanks to many of you who are sharing your comments. Marsha will be thrilled to look at those later, but it seems like everyone is really excited for the content that you're going to share with us today, Marsha.
Great, thank you. And I want to share with everyone that there will be times I'm going to ask some questions, and feel free in the chat box to just mention what you're feeling, what you're thinking about the question that I ask, and I'll take a look as I'm talking to you. I can see some of it coming through, so it's sort of a conversation. At least I can hear your thoughts that way. So great. So I want to say that this week I was talking to a CEO of a company, and he was telling me that there had been some major misunderstandings between him and his vice president. And he needed him to understand some things, but he was really afraid to have this conversation. And, I asked him what he was afraid of. He says, well, he's always talking about leaving. It's like, what if I approach him and he decides to leave? And so I asked him the question. I said, do you realize that this fear that you have is holding you ransom? that you're paying with your silence just because you think he might blow up. Well, he paused for a moment and said, "You're right." And just by me asking the question, he was open enough to explore some other possibilities of how he could have this conversation with this gentleman, that maybe it could have a different result. And that, in fact, instead of him worrying about what he should say, I was helping to understand that it was more important what he should ask that could possibly change the person's mind, that maybe the change that the CEO really wanted to see, that he could get it through asking questions instead of making demands and requests that he was so afraid to make. So a lot of what we're going to talk about today is how do you actually listen for the right things to say instead of rehearsing what I should say before I go into these conversations. So one of the things, I have been teaching communication skills for well over 30 years now. I like to quit counting. But what's really interesting, for years it really was the question, what makes communication effective? There was always, well, there's the speaker and the receiver, and it depends on what you say that matters. And so we were looking at formulas and steps of how to introduce and handle this conversation, and that many of the conversation books that are still very, very popular still focus on what is it I should say to get my request across, to be firm, to have courage, to speak the words. And what I've learned actually really in the last decade, as I've gotten deeper into how the brain works and how we actually learn, that the work that I did with my doctoral work, that all that stuff about preparation, that we're not really hearing what it is that the person needs in order to change their mind. And so when you look at that, what makes communication effective is that you actually get the reaction you're looking for. And so we focus on the reaction. What's it going to take to get the person to truly stop and think about their thinking and maybe think differently? And that it will be in the words you say, but not necessarily the words you rehearse. So the question really is, how do you listen for what to say that can change someone's mind? Which means you are going to have the courage to go into a conversation not knowing, exactly what you're going to say. That it's really important that you're going to get what you need to say to the person from the person themselves. So there's specific ways of listening and asking questions that gives you the input that makes it clear, this is what I need to say and ask, that will make the person stop and think and question themselves about what they're doing. And that's the way we change people's minds. So what I want to look at with you today in our brief time together, so again, if I was teaching this, we'd take time to practice and do all these things. So this is, like your overview. But hopefully then what you'll do is you'll go out and you'll try these things. We're going to look at preparation, because there's still preparation, even though you're not, I don't want you to rehearse, this is exactly what I'm going to say. You still have to prepare for these conversations. So we're going to look at preparation. And then when I say converse, it's about the conversation. What does the conversation look like? And then even more so, what does it take to truly shift, to create that breakthrough that will actually change someone's mind right there in the moment? So when we look at preparation, what I want you to think about is, I want you to recall the last time that you had a difficult conversation, and what was going on in your mind and your body before you entered the room. What did you feel about the person, and what were you expecting to happen? There's so much power in just stopping and asking yourself that. What am I feeling in this moment, and what am I expecting this person to do? So even that vice president that was, expecting the CEO was expecting the VP to blow up, Well, he was going to go in nervous and angry and creating the situation where the VP probably would blow up. So when we look at preparing, you have to really look at what are the emotions and the judgments and the expectations that you're holding that are going to impact the result more than those careful words you choose. So when we look at the things that you need to really prepare for, the first thing I want to explain is what do I mean by conversation intention? What is the intention that you need to hold at the beginning and throughout this conversation that's going to make the difference for the person that you're with? Then you want to look at the emotional tone because that's going to be critical in the impact and the outcome. And then what kind of regard are you holding this person in? What's the space, and are you holding them in high regard? So when we look at this whole thing about intention, intention is the person needs to feel as if you are there to help them, that you're not just there to get your goal or met, your need met, or your goal achieved. If you go in with, you need to fix them, they're going to feel that you're making me wrong or stupid. and people don't want to feel as if they're broken. And so if you already know this is what I want the person to do, that they're not doing this and they need to do this, then they're going to feel like you're pushing your agenda and that you're not truly interested in theirs. And so when you go into this conversation, you have to be very clear what is the intention. And knowing that if it's only for you to get what it is that you want, then that could shut them down. That could shut them down. And so what we're looking at in these conversations is, do you know what it is that they want? And I'm going to talk about this a little bit more when we talk about desired outcome in the conversation. But truly the intention is that I'm going into this conversation to help this person achieve something that they want. Is it that they want to be a leader, or do they want more respect, or maybe they just need to feel more comfortable with the situation? Your intention has to be for something that they want so they feel comfortable with you. So again, be clear with yourself. What is my intention in this conversation? There's this wonderful book I often refer to called I and Thou, very classic book written by Martin Buber. And he says there's a number of positions that we hold when we enter conversation. But one of the most common is I, it. It's you are a means to my end. And when people feel that you it them, they're not likely to engage with you in this conversation, especially if it's, they're negative to start out with. And so what Buber says, it's got to be a conversation, he said, calls it I and thou, where I'm here to help you achieve something that I know that you want, and there's something getting in the way of you achieving that, which could be their behavior or the way they see the world. And maybe it's not helpful, but they have to feel first that your intention is to help them. So we look first at intention, and then at emotional tone. So particularly if you're the leader, you do set the emotional tone of the conversations. Leaders always set the emotional tone. They say it's the dominant social person in the interaction. But even so, if you're going into this conversation, even if you feel their emotions very strongly, you want to be able to think through, what is it that I want to feel in this conversation? What is it that I want them to feel? If you want them to feel calm, confident, and caring, then you have to feel that way yourself. So again, in preparation, often what I have my clients do is I have them vision how they would love to see the conversation going. From the beginning to the end, to the outcome. Oftentimes people vision just the start of a conversation and they don't see the end. And so it doesn't always go how they had planned. So I ask them to sort of vision what would be, the best case scenario. And then at the end of the vision, I ask them, what's the one word, emotional word, that would make a difference, that would help you get to that? And that emotion word becomes the key word. So while you're in this conversation and you come in feeling strong, confident, and care about this person, but their resistance and their stubbornness makes you impatient and angry, you say that one word to yourself, whether it's calm, confident, compassion. And what will happen is your brain will actually activate that vision without you having to go through it. And I do this because you should then, let it sink into your body and feel that emotion. How you feel has more impact on their reactions than what you say. And the word curious oftentimes is really helpful because you want to be curious about, why they see the world the way they do. If you aren't listening to them, why would you expect them to listen to you? So go in with a bit of curiosity. And then finally, when I said high regard, this is about, truly believing in their potential. So you need to trust that the person can discover the right answers on their own if you ask them the right questions. That they're smart and they're capable, they don't need you to fix them, and that if you're there and you care about their future, and you're really listening to them and asking them about how they think and what went into the assumptions that they're carrying, that, again, they're going to sense that you believe in them, and this is going to make a huge potential. So you have, going to make a huge difference in the conversation. So you need to ask yourself these three things. What's my intention for this conversation? Can I shift it, or at least carry a dual intention where it's something important to them that I'm helping them to achieve? What's the emotion that I'm feeling? What is it that I want to feel throughout this conversation? And find your keyword. And then, am I holding them in high regard? Do I trust them? And do I trust this process? Because if you don't trust the process I'm going to share with you, the process that I share in the book, The Discomfort Zone, if you don't trust that, you're going to go back to your old way, which hasn't been working. So go in trusting them and trusting the process. And so I want to get into the conversation, but is there any questions about the preparation? Becky, do we have any questions?
I'm waiting for some to come in. Someone did want some more details about the book that you mentioned with Martin Buber.
Okay. Sure. I Am Thou is a classic book. I got it in my, before I had my master's in instructional design, I started in counseling, and then I realized it was going to take 2 more years than instructional design, and I switched over. But I was introduced to this wonderful book, and Buber was the person who actually translated the Bible into German, so he's got a religious background, and that's why I think he uses the word I and thou and looking at the sacred self in everyone that we speak to. But it's just, to me, and it's translated into English, he wrote it in German, just a beautiful book that really looks at what are the positions that we hold when we talk to people. And for me to be aware when I'm talking to anyone, especially if I'm angry or disappointed with them, what position am I holding them in? Is it an it or is it a thou? That's so critical in the conversation outcome. So it's I and thou. And it's still in print, even though it's, very, very old. Okay?
Sure, and there are several questions, Marcia, and this one Bonnie has asked, and thank you, Bonnie, because I was asking the same question. I wrote it down in my notes. What happens if you don't trust the person based on their recent behavior or intent toward you? So how can we come to a conversation with this positive regard and intent if there's a lack of trust?
Well, that's an interesting question, because first I'd say the way the question was stated was because of their recent behavior. So if I was talking to you, I would say, did you trust them before? And so what was the one thing that they did that took away your trust? And sometimes we go into a conversation saying, that we've had a good relationship in the past, but this behavior, whatever it was, maybe they revealed a confidence or they didn't do what they promised. You might even say, I would say, I believe in your capability and I'm having a difficult time. I'm disappointed because of what happened. So I would be honest with, I would go in with the intention, again, of, wanting to believe that the person can step up, having a high regard for the person, but be honest with, but I'm disappointed about what happened. And, I'd like to see if we could get over that. Would you be willing to work with me on that? And that's a really important question I learned years ago, that, when you state that, to always ask the question, would you be willing to work with me on, improving the situation, to get back where we were, or to develop trust between us. Because then if they say yes, then there's a willingness to move forward. If they say no, forget it. Then you know what? You might need to be more direct, and everything I teach you is not going to work. So yeah, I would be honest with that.
Great. And there was some follow-up that there was trust, and then there was, so Bonnie's saying there was trust, and then the person lied about staff and work they're doing. So it sounds like your input is right on target. Here's another question, Marcia. So John is mentioning that you're talking about a face-to-face interaction or a face-to-face scenario. Do you think that this method works in virtual settings or on the phone as well? And what advice would you have with that?
It does. Being that you can't see the person, it's a little bit harder to know their reactions, but most of my coaching is on the phone, and I've gotten very good at hearing reactions. And also allowing for a lot of pauses. Pauses feel more uncomfortable on the phone than they do in real life, because you're like, are you there? You hang up. But in this conversation, when you ask a question that makes people stop and think, they will often have a long pause as their brain, actually is rewiring. When we stop and think, the brain is doing there's a lot of brain activity, which causes the person to pause. And so you have to allow for a lot of pauses. And remember that in these conversations, you're listening. You're listening for what to say. So, you're asking questions and really listening to the person. And so be sure that, you listen well on the phone. And so I was trained as a coach on the phone, and so and I had doubts, major doubts that this could work. And then I realized I don't have as much distractions on the phone even as a face-to-face. Sometimes it's easier. So absolutely, virtually it could work. Do you want to use Skype or something with a camera? That could work as well, so you're actually engaging with the person. But I've not had any trouble with virtual conversations.
Very helpful.
Definitely over email there could be misinterpretation, so I would at least have it live. So.
Absolutely. Okay, so we have lots of questions, and one is here from April, wondering, some individuals will shut down and will not open up, which makes it difficult to have an honest conversation. What recommendation would you have in that case if someone's shutting down?
What I'd like to do is go into the conversation a little bit to answer that question, because the format that I have actually engages people to have conversations. And oftentimes, that's an excuse I often hear from leaders, because I teach these techniques to leaders all over the world. And they always say, well, people just shut down. And I always say, I think then the problem is in your listening and not what you're saying. Because it's amazing that when I feel as if you're really listening to me and you care about me and you really want me to help to achieve my goals, and I sincerely believe that, I open up. I've rarely had that problem where people don't open up. But if I go into this conversation and I feel like you think I'm an idiot or I'm not to be trusted, and you need to fix me, then absolutely I shut down. So going back to what's the intention of this conversation, what is my emotions, how can I show the person I care about them and sincere in helping them to move forward, and holding them in high regard, that's going to open them. And then let me go through some of the steps now in the conversation, and then we can come back to that. Is that okay? Becky, you think that's okay?
Yes, I'll hold some of the questions and share them later.
You know what?
That's perfect. I'm here. Yes, thank you.
Okay, great. Okay, because I think they're going to connect. And also, a lot of these questions that people are asking, back in the fall, I did this crazy thing for LinkedIn to where I was answering questions frantically for 4 hours where people were asking me similar questions, and LinkedIn did a wonderful job of summarizing all the answers. So if we don't get to all your questions, Becky, in the follow-up email to everyone from this, I'll give you the link too for that, and it's also on my website, so I'll make sure everyone gets that, because I bet they'll find their question and answer in that. Okay?
That sounds like a great resource. Thank you.
Okay, great. Okay, so what exactly is that you say? And so, you know, one of the things that I share often is this, the most significant people in our lives have made us feel unsure of ourselves. And I know that sounds like counterintuitive, like that's crazy. Don't significant people make us feel confident? But what I want to say is that the greatest leaps in our lives is when somebody has stopped and made us really question who I think I am and how I see the world. Because I operate in this automatic pilot, we all do, of who I am and how I see the world. And when somebody has said something to me or, you know, or made me stop, maybe whether it was a question or a statement, and I'm like, oh, wow, you know, maybe I am seeing things wrong. But that's when I'm truly open to learning. That's when I can finally see myself even in a bigger way and the world around me in a broader way that's going to help me succeed. And it takes courage to do this. But when you think about in your own life the people that prompted you to change your behavior, oftentimes it was that, you know, that teacher that made you raise your hand and say something, you know, even though you didn't want to, you know, or the grumpy neighbor that made you realize that you were being a jerk. You know, those things that you remember in your life, it wasn't always a comfortable moment. It was, you know, within that discomfort that the person, you know, made you, again, stop and really question yourself, that you realized something that actually led you, even in that moment or, you know, in the future, to see yourself and the world around you in a bigger way. You know, and so I want to briefly explain, you know, how this happens, why it's this disruption that we're looking for. And so what's important to this is I've talked to you about how to prepare for a conversation. But when you're dealing with someone who's really resistant and negative, you really have to go for the disruption. But this is why the preparation is important, because you can't go in angry, disappointed, you know, and not believing in them. You truly have to, if you go in with the right emotions and believing in them, then you can make this disruption work. Because you see, what happens is we go in telling people what to do. And, you know, and we're used to this fact-based learning. Here's what you should know. You know, that's what they tell us in school. You should know this. And, you know, of course, I mean, how many of those things do you remember from school? You know, because the thing is that fact-based learning is very inefficient, especially in our crazy just consuming world where we've got too much email and too many online articles and all this stuff, that whatever it is you tell me, I'm not likely to remember. That the only way I'm going to remember anything is that if it really piques my interest, and my brain says, wow, look at this. I mean, when you think about whatever happened during the day that you then go home and you tell your partner, this is what happened, it was always something that had some big emotional impact on you, whether it was great or it was terrible, you know. And even so, information doesn't necessarily indicate a behavioral change. I mean, how many times do people know what to do, but they just don't do it? You know, think of yourself. You know what to do, but you just don't do it. So just giving people information doesn't impact the part of the brain that actually changes their behavior. So it's really inefficient to tell people what to do. So then we also have fear-based learning, which is often what leaders do. You better do this or else. Parents do it, teachers do it, we all do it. And we learn this way. You know, fear-based learning is the same as motor skills. You know, you learn how to ride a bike, you always ride a bike. You learn how to drive a car, and you can drive a car without thinking. Thank God we all can do this well, otherwise we'd be crashing all the time. But the problem is then if I learn that way, if I learn by fear, I learn one way. And what happens is it lodges below long-term memory, and so it's a permanent. You know, when we learn to be afraid, and we learn something due to fear, it's very difficult to change it. It's permanent. And then we want people to change, and we wonder why they resist, because they learned based on fear in the first place. So it's really inefficient. What we learn by fear is nearly impossible to change. We almost have to, like, relearn something new in order to change it. And so you don't want to do this, you know, ultimatum thing. You better do this or else, you know, because it's not efficient, especially if, you know, unless the person's learning a rote skill, it's not efficient in teaching people to think for themselves. So what we're aiming for is we're aiming to work in the middle brain, and this is where long-term memory is, so we can make connections and be creative and innovative with whatever we learn. What's also lodged in the middle is this thing called ego. When we want people to change their behavior, we're actually dealing with how they see themselves in the world, which is what ego is. Ego is who I think I am and how I see myself fit into this world. And this is the way I behave. And now you're wanting me to behave differently. Well, then I have to change who I think I am and how I see the world, you know, not just because you think I should change. So what happens is we're dealing with this thing called ego, but I seriously protect this because I can't be constantly asking myself, who am I? What's this world? You know, I have to get up in the morning and know where I'm at and what I'm supposed to do. So I protect this dearly. But the interesting thing is I protect it for myself. I don't even allow myself to go in and question this very well. And so we don't do self-evaluation well, but there are certain things that can break through this. So how I see the world, the rules I live by, my beliefs, who I am. If you ask me a question that makes me stop and think about these things, then all of a sudden it breaks through. And I go, oh, gosh, I hadn't thought about that. I didn't know. You know, or wow, you're right, you know, I'm not getting what I want. That's what we're aiming for, is something that breaks through that to where I question myself. You know, and so what we have is, this is called insight-based learning. The moment that I see myself in the world differently, my behavior changes. My behavior automatically has to change, and I can't go back. I can't go back. So it's like my old boss, who I didn't get along with well, but he always had a way of listening to me and asking the right questions. And one time I was complaining about all my coworkers and how they never did anything right. And, you know, he says to me, he goes, wow, everyone really disappoints you, don't they? It made me stop, and it was like, oh my God, you know, that's true. Nobody kind of lives up to me, and, you know, and I couldn't even fathom this. And then he asked me the question. He says, what would it take for someone to be good enough for you? And it wasn't even in that moment that I even could see the impact of those two, you know, the reflection and the question. Just over the next few days, my brain just started connecting, and I realized that, you know, well, being disappointed keeps me separate from people, keeps me being better than people, and nobody could live up to my great standards. I mean, there was a lot of goofy things that was impacting my relationships with my peers, my ability for people to see me as a leader. It led to huge conversations, but it was the reflection and the question that broke through this that made the difference for me. And he could only get that from listening to me and questioning me about that. You know, so behavior learning can happen when we tell somebody that something that is in total alignment with what they believe, and they go, yeah, that's right. But if you have people that resist, then learning comes when you break down the protective barrier. This is your best chance to shift the negativity, is to break through that. And that's why you can't go in with your well-rehearsed speech. I mean, you can go in with how you want to start the conversation. You know, here's what it is that I want to talk about, and here's what I believe. I believe in you. I believe you can be seen with respect by your peers, that you can be a leader, and I would really like to talk about how you can best achieve that. So you could go in with your opening statement, but how it plays out is going to be based on what they say. And so to trigger behavior learning, it's always based on a surprising fact, a disruptive reflection, or a powerful question. The book I often refer to is this Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman, where he talks about the only way to get people to slow down and think about their thinking is in dialogue, in conversation, where we ask the disruptive reflection, the powerful question, or even just reflect back to people. So you're telling me this, is it true? You know, to even notice what people are going through. You know, I was coaching an executive team, and they were all upset because their managing director was leaving. He'd been there for 14 years, and they all loved him. This was quasi-governmental, and so it was going to be, a new leader was going to be appointed by a board, and they were all very upset. And so I just asked them, I said, so tell me what's going on. And one by one, each of the executives told me how terrible it was going to be. One guy was going to retire. Another guy was just going to take his team and go hide. I mean, it was just awful. You know, and so I said to them, I said, I hear you. I hear that you're sad he's leaving. You're scared about what's going to happen. You're angry because you don't get any input in this decision. I understand that. And I can see why you feel that way. And so I just want to know right now in this very moment, what do you know to be true? And they sat there and they stared at me for a while, and then finally someone said, well, I guess the only thing we know to be true is that he's leaving. I said, okay, great. With that information, he's leaving, and the rest of it is just assumption. What do you need to do? And it was just the acknowledgement of what they were going through and then asking them the question. And I didn't make them wrong or right. I just acknowledged that they were having these experiences, and then I asked, what do you know to be true? Which led them to say, well, it was finally after a long pause, the head of HR said, well, I guess we need to shore up our succession planning so we can deal with any leader, you know? And it's like, my next question was, how can I help, you know? So again, you know, it doesn't have to be a long thing, but I had to listen to them first. So learning happens in that moment, you know, where you ask the question that makes them stop and think. And when the view of themselves in the world changes, then so does their behavior. So the model that's in the book is, you know, and I'm going to just briefly go through it. Is, again, you've got to find together what is that desired outcome that they want to achieve. And then you use reflection, exploration, and acknowledgement of what's, you know, true for them now, what do they now realize, and then ask them what it is that they need to do. So again, briefly, and I know there's a lot of words on these slides, but, you know, based on time, I just want to go through it. And actually, the model is on my website as well under the Discomfort Zone at outsmartyourbrain.com, as well as in the book. But you always have to find out from the person what is it that they really want that's going to, you know, that's going to lead to the change, because they're not going to change it because you want them to or somebody else. But what is it that's important to them that they're standing in their own way, you know, that they can't get because of their behavior? You know, and I often have this with high achievers transitioning into leadership. They can't let go of being the best, but then they're not acting like a leader, you know, and to help them to see what it is they're doing, you know, I reflect on what they say. What's the impact of your behavior? Is that helping you get what you want? You know, and when they say, no, it's not, it's like, okay, so what do you need to change to get what you want? You know, so we always start with the desired outcome and then listen to them. Reflect on what they're telling you. What are the assumptions and the beliefs and the emotions? It's always, you know, as somebody's talking to me, there's always something, or all of a sudden their voice will raise, you know, and it'll show you the key trigger point. That's what's really annoying them. That's where they're stuck. That's where they're blocked. That's where the blind spot is. And I just listen until I hear that. And it's like, oh, there it is. And I stop and I say, let me ask you about that. And so a lot of the reflection is just to clarify what you hear until they spill it. So the person that says, well, people don't talk to me, it's like, you know what, if you show them that you're interested in their goals and you just say, so tell me about the situation, and you show an interest, and maybe it'll take more than one conversation because they have to trust you. But honestly, if you really listen and reflect back and show you're listening, in my experience, most of the time they'll open up, and if they don't trust you enough because of you or the baggage they're holding, then you have to deal with that. So what's it going to take for you to open up and trust me? And I would just ask that question. So then the exploration is where you then can ask the question. So you reflect on what you hear and then ask them about it. And don't worry, again, about long pauses, because when you ask these questions and it pops their brain, then they'll stare at you like a baby seeing something for the first time. Because their brain is making new connections. Your brain says, uh-oh, that doesn't compute, and the brain is a meaning-making machine. I have to make meaning of what I now see. So you have to give them time. And then ask them, so now what do you know? Because a lot of times they'll say, oh, wow, now I get it. You have to ask them, what do you get? They have to articulate it, otherwise they could lose it. So you ask them, what do you now understand? Then you could ask them, so what's the action? What are you going to do about that? So we reflect on what they're saying, which is so important. Hold up the mirror from what they're expressing and what you're hearing that, that they really need, that they're not fully saying. And you ask them questions about that, which helps them to think for themselves, and then get them to acknowledge the new awareness before they make their plan. And so what you're doing is you're helping people to see their thinking, and then their blind spots and their resistance actually come to light, and their excuses crumble. And this is what we're looking for. And it's not going to always happen in every conversation, and sometimes it happens after the conversation. You ask the questions, they get resistant, crazy, and then they go away and think about it. I've had that happen over and over and over. So, the thing is, be present. Be present. And you don't have to be perfect. They want you to be present more than they need you to be perfect. And so the key here is to make sure that that you go in non-judgmental and that you're really curious and you care about them, and then see what happens. So I'm recognizing the time, and I want to quickly go through just a couple of things that are important in part of the listening, and then we'll open it up for questions. So I go into this heavily in my training and my speaking, and I know we don't have time here, but I want to just share with you that the main thing in this is presence. Is that you listen beyond just your brain. And I did this research starting with a friend of mine was doing her dissertation, and she was working with master coaches and said, so what is it that you do that makes you a master? And they said, well, we access our intuition. And she said, well, how do you do that? And they were like, well, you just do it. And I said, well, is not a good answer. And so, we don't talk about intuition in the workplace because most people think it's something that wizards and psychics, or maybe women, do better than men. But, there isn't any research that proves that to be true. It's really about listening deeply and trusting, what you're sensing, and can you do that? And so I went and I did a lot of research around what's going on when I say this. I said, if you were to look at your entire nervous system, because I believe intuition is inner space, it's not about outer space, it's not what we get from the universe, it's happening inside. And our nervous system actually consists of more than just the brain. We have two major processing centers where we pick up input as a mammal, and that includes our gut and our heart. And how many times have you said to yourself, I should have trusted my gut, or my heart was telling me to do it, but I didn't, So we have it in our language, and there's research that shows there's 100 million neurons in your gut. That's far more than you need to process your food, sending signals to your brain, because the brain has language. And the heart, Andrew Armour and the Heart Math Institute has done a lot of research around processing in the heart. And so what we have is in the nervous system, we have the head, the heart, and the gut. The head has the only language center, so the impulses are sent to the head. But then the head, if we're not fully listening, we allow the head to filter and to judge and to serve our ego. And so if we want to get beyond that, we have to get really good at listening to our heart, and our gut. I mean, think about it. When you have a decision to make, we often, even if you use curiosity to open your brain, you think about shoulds and pros and cons. But if somebody were to ask you, what is your heart saying to you? Would you hear something different? Would you hear something different? And then if somebody said to you, well, be strong, be strong. What is your gut saying? Would you hear something different about that? And would you make a different decision? So even when I coach, oftentimes I'll even ask my clients, okay, so just stop for a moment. What is your heart saying? And I know for me, I can access my gut really well, but my heart is the hardest place for me to access. And if I get really stuck with a client and I don't know a question to ask, I'll go to my heart. Okay, heart, what are you saying? And it's really interesting that the question that I need to ask just emerges. And so I've been teaching this to coaches around the world. It's amazing, this technique of how to fully listen from these places and how to bring that into our conversation. And it does take disciplined practice. So I'm not telling you something that you just go out and do. But again, if you can get a buddy to practice with, and just listen. From your head we hear beliefs, assumptions about what's true. But from the heart, we really hear what is it people want, but also what's disappointed them and where do you feel betrayed. So the woman who feels betrayed by the person that she doesn't trust anymore, I would ask her, what was that betrayal about? What is it you really need from this point? Because the answer is here. The answer is here. And from the gut, that's fear. This is our will. And oftentimes, again, in transitions, what people can't let go of. You're going to hear it. I always get this hit in my gut. It's like, It's like, okay, that's it. The moment that I get these sensations, I know I need to ask about it. And I could be dead wrong. It doesn't matter. So it seems to me that you can't let go of this. If I'm wrong, they'll say, no, that's not it. This is it. And we brought the conversation to a deeper level. And honestly, when you look at, there's some very basic things that people, feel, they get resistant when they don't feel they're being respected, or they don't get recognition, or maybe under times of change that they're losing control, like the executive team I told you about. They didn't know what was going to happen to them, and they felt out of control. And I needed to acknowledge that before we could move on. Sometimes it's safety. And, it's amazing to me how many times leaders can't have difficult conversations because they're afraid of two things. One, either people won't like me, or, well, obviously then I haven't done everything I could, so I must be a bad leader. And so they're afraid that of losing respect. It's really interesting. So, can people still hear me? I'm getting a note that the audio was lost? Okay, I can't hear you, but okay. Okay, so I'm guessing it's okay.
Yes, I can still hear you, Marcia. We seem to have gotten we have a pause on your audio, and your camera has gone away, but we can still hear you.
Okay, interesting. All right. So the question is always, what is it that they really need that they think they're not getting? Can they get that, and will that help them move forward, or can you help them let it go? And it's rarely about what it is that they think is the presenting problem. And a lot of this stuff comes out of emotional intelligence, so when you're listening for what is it the person really needs in this moment, and getting over yourself, and how can I help them to get that, just reflecting on those makes them stop and think, and that's what we're aiming for. So when we listen from these places and we hear what the person really needs and we reflect them back, we get them to stop and think about what they think and feel. And then we want them to ask questions so they question themselves, and then maybe then they can articulate what else could be true and possible. So it really is, it's a spontaneous process. It's actually the creative process. If you look at the research in creativity, that it's about being able to shut down your cognitive brain and fully access your middle brain. It's the same thing when you're having these conversations, is don't fall into judgment. Just fully listen and share what you see and hear, and ask questions about it and let them respond, and then see if they come up with something new. So, I'd like to take just a couple of questions, then I have a couple of final tips to end on. So is there a burning question maybe you've seen a few times, Becky?
There are a couple of related questions that I'd like to share, Marcia. So one person asked, does this model work peer-to-peer? And then related to that question is, how do you do this when it's your boss that you have to have that uncomfortable conversation with?
Yeah. I've had experiences of using it up, down, and sideways. I think it's really good to use with peers. Of course, you have to have sort of permission. Can we have this conversation? Would you be willing to look at, at our relationship, at the project, at the situation, what's going on? Would you be willing to look at this with me? So it asks for that willingness first, to see if there's an open door. And again, remember, you're going in to help them achieve something, not just for you to achieve your goal. So, absolutely, you can have this with peers, you can have this with kids, you can have it with other people. Managing up is always a difficult thing, but again, too, you really need to think, what is it that my boss really wants and needs that he's not getting? And if you went into the conversation with, I know that the team is not responding well to the plan you laid out, I've been talking to people, and I have, some interesting perspectives. Would you be willing to hear some of that? And you can tell in the response, if they're open. But then I would still go into, could you first share your perception of what happened when you presented your plan? So I would still want to hear his perception and ask questions about it. Before I go in saying, you presented your plan and didn't listen to anybody and they feel disrespected. You could share that, but I would listen first. But it's always, again, got to be based on what it is that they want and need. What is their business objective or even their personal objective, and would they be willing to have the conversation with you about that?
That's very helpful. Thanks. So the next question I want to share, it comes from the other side. So what would you do, or how would you move past damage that's done to you if someone's agenda is not based on caring for your growth? So I think Penny's question here is speaking to, I've been on the wrong side of an uncomfortable conversation, and I've been hurt by someone who didn't use this approach. And what recommendation would you have for that?
Yeah, actually in the LinkedIn conversation, there was a lot of those, that I've been with somebody who's been a real jerk. And when we start these conversations, oftentimes when I teach this, I like using a real quick feedback model. And the model I like is the AID model, where I say, when we have that, AID stands for action, impact, desired outcome. And the impact is most important. So, when we have that conversation, and then you give the action, you kept interrupting me and telling me what you wanted, and you didn't listen to me at all. Okay, impact. Then AID, action, impact, and impact is most critical. As a result, I feel like, you don't really care about what I have to say, and, you don't respect my point of view, and I don't really feel that you're interested in having a good relationship with me. And then the desired outcome is, are you interested? Would you be willing to work on this relationship, and more productive conversations in the future? And they may have to think about it. You know, they may say, yeah, sure. But you can tell that they're resistant in the moment, and then you might say, oh, great, could we schedule a time to have that conversation? So you give them a chance to think about it a little. But the importance of that is the impact. You know, people can argue with you about behavior, but they can't argue with you as much about the impact. The impact just is. So what was the impact on you? What was the impact on the team? You know, and then the desired result would be, again, something that has to be important to them. You know, so I'd like to work, you know, would you be interested in our relationship? Would you be interested in having a better impact with the team? You know, I would like to talk to you about that. So that's how I would start the conversation. So the desired outcome might be your desired outcome, but it has to be something that they want too. So you start with, here's what happened, here was the impact, here's the desired outcome I'd like to work on.
Very helpful. Thanks.
Yeah. Okay. I just want to end with a couple things. Again, you have to be patient and comfortable with discomfort. It's really important. Then as you get unnerved, you take a breath and remember your key word. What was it that I want to feel? You come back to that and just breathe it in. Their discomfort, when you ask them things, you know, it could range. They could get angry with you because their brain is like totally messed up. That's okay. Give them space. I've had people scream at me, and then they come back, they settle down, and they say, okay, you're right. So just allow people to go through whatever it is they need to go through. So be sure and relax. You know, get rid of your judgment, center yourself, and focus on your keywords. What is it that you really want to feel in this moment? And sometimes, you know, you need to call the conversation, and you need to just state, you know, I really want to work on this. It doesn't seem like we're getting anywhere. Would you like to have this conversation later? Sometimes you have to call it, you know, if it's truly not going anywhere. But just say, I don't feel like we're getting anywhere and that you really want to work on this. And then, you know, but say you would like to at some other point. And then see what happens. See if they'll, you know, come back to the conversation with you later. So, and always take care of yourself. You know, it's hard to have difficult conversations if you're not healthy and you're tired and you're hungry and, you know, and you're not happy with your life, your relationships are a mess, and your finances are bad. You know, so you're better off having difficult conversations if you take care of yourself first. So I always have to throw that in my programs, you know, to keep that in mind. So, that's, wow, got a lot in.
Yeah, I love that. Marsha, thank you so much for spending this hour with us. I want to recap a couple of things as we end the hour. The first is that I'm putting my email address, becky@weavinginfluence.com, into the chat window. The first 5 of you who send me the biggest area of impact from this event, at Becky, so if you email me, becky@weavinginfluence.com, the first 5 people that I hear from will get a free Kindle version, ebook copy of Marsha's book, and we'll send that to you later. I did have a lot of questions as it relates to resources that Marsha mentioned on the call, and I will be sending those to you in a follow-up email. Marsha would love to work with you and your company to provide training in leadership, coaching skills, and emotional intelligence. She also coaches both individuals and teams to improve their communications and achieve amazing results. So it's my deep hope that you'll find a way to stay connected to Marsha after this event to continue to learn from her. And I would also say, if you enjoyed today's presentation, the Discomfort Zone is available on major online retailers everywhere, and we would love to be able to see you purchase that book today, even after you sign off. So I look forward to hearing from you via email with your input and follow-up, and we're excited to be able to share Marsha's book. So Marsha, thank you again so much for spending this hour with us.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thank you. And thank everybody for attending.